Some houses hold more than furniture and memories. They hold promises. Promises whispered during late-night conversations, traced along kitchen counters, sealed with laughter echoing through hallways. Inez Carvalho believed her home in Lisbon was one of those places, a sanctuary built on love, painted with years of devotion, anchored by the man she married. But promises, like foundations, can crack. And when they do, the collapse is silent, sudden, and absolute. This is the story of a woman who lost everything she thought was hers, only to discover that ownership was never about a deed. It was about something far more permanent. By the end, you'll understand why the cruelest eviction became the greatest liberation. Inez was 32 when her husband, Tomás, died. A heart attack at 41, sudden as summer thunder over the Tagus. One moment he was laughing at the breakfast table, planning their weekend trip to Sintra. The next, he was gone. Grief is a strange architect. It rebuilds your world in shadows, erases color, makes every room feel foreign. Inez wandered through their house like a ghost, touching his shirt still hanging in the closet, his coffee mug unwashed by the sink. She thought the house would hold her through the morning. She thought it was hers. "I thought it would keep me safe," she would later whisper to herself in the dark. But safety, like love, is not guaranteed by walls. 3 weeks after the funeral, a knock came at the door. It was Leonor, Tomás's mother. Tall, silver-haired, draped in black lace and cold composure. She did not embrace Inez. She did not ask how she was sleeping or if the nights were unbearable. She simply said, "We need to talk about the house." And in that moment, Inez felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. What Leonor revealed was a truth Tomás had never shared. The deed to the house was in his mother's name, always had been. Tomás had never transferred it. Inez had lived there for 8 years, decorated it, planted jasmine in the courtyard, painted the bedroom walls a soft blue, but legally, she owned nothing. Leonor's voice was calm, almost polite. "You were a guest in my son's life, and now that life is over. I need you to leave." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward, drowning everything. Inez stood in the doorway, staring at the woman who had just dismantled her world. Leonor did not flinch. Her face was carved from marble, her gaze steady and unrepentant. "You're asking me to leave?" Inez's voice cracked, barely a whisper. "I'm not asking," Leonor replied. "I'm telling you. This house belongs to me. Tomás made arrangements, but he never finished them. That's not my fault." The air between them thickened with disbelief. Inez felt her knees weaken, her chest tighten. She wanted to scream, to rage, to demand justice. But what justice was there in grief? What court could reverse death or rewrite the past? Leonor turned toward the door, her heels clicking softly against the tile. "I'll give you 1 week to collect your things. After that, I'll have the locks changed." And then she was gone, leaving only the scent of her perfume and the echo of finality. That night, Inez sat on the edge of the bed she had shared with Tomás, staring at the walls they had painted together. The jasmine outside the window swayed gently in the breeze, indifferent to her suffering. She thought about calling someone, a friend, a lawyer, anyone. But who would believe her? Who would care? The truth was simple and brutal. She had no legal claim, no proof of contribution, no voice in a system that valued paper over presence. "How did I become invisible?" she thought. The question burned in her chest, heavy and unanswerable. She had been a wife, a partner, a woman who believed in forever. Now she was nothing but a guest being politely evicted from her own life. The week passed in a blur of cardboard boxes and silent tears. Inez packed her clothes, her books, a few photographs. She left the furniture, the dishes, the jasmine. She left the life she had built. On the final day, she stood in the empty living room, holding their wedding photo in her hands. They looked so young, so certain. Tomas's arm around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder, both of them smiling like the future was a gift already unwrapped. She set the frame down on the mantel and walked out into the Lisbon rain, the door closing softly behind her. No one was there to say goodbye. No one was there to witness the ending. The streets were slick with water, the sky heavy and gray. Inez walked without direction, her suitcase dragging behind her, her heart numb. She found herself at a small cafe near the Alfama district, the kind of place tourists never noticed. She sat by the window, ordered a coffee she didn't drink, and stared at the cobblestones glistening in the rain. An older woman at the next table glanced at her, then looked away. Pity was easy to recognize. Inez hated it. She hated the weakness it implied, the vulnerability it exposed. But more than that, she hated the truth it confirmed. She was alone, completely, devastatingly alone. What do I do now? The question hung in the air, unanswered, but somewhere, deep in the quiet wreckage of her heart, a small voice whispered back, "You survive. You always survive." And though she didn't believe it yet, she would remember those words. Have you ever lost something you thought was yours forever, only to realize it never truly was? Survival, Inez learned, was not poetic. It was small, unglamorous, and brutally practical. She rented a cramped room in a shared apartment in Moraria, a neighborhood where the walls were thin and the nights were loud. Her roommates were young, transient, indifferent. They passed each other in the hallway like strangers on a bus. Inez kept to herself, ate alone, slept with her back to the door. The room smelled faintly of mold and someone else's cigarettes, but it was cheap, and cheap was all she could afford. She had no savings. Tomas had managed our finances, and when he died, the accounts were frozen, tangled in bureaucracy and Leona's quiet control. Inez was left with nothing but the clothes in her suitcase and the crushing weight of starting over. She found work cleaning offices in the Parc das Nações district. The job started at 5 in the morning and ended at noon. She scrubbed toilets, emptied trash bins, mopped floors that smelled of disinfectant and exhaustion. The pay was modest, barely enough to cover rent and food, but it was steady, and steadiness was a kind of mercy. The other cleaners were mostly women, older, weathered, quiet. They spoke little, moved efficiently, and asked no questions. Inez fit in easily. She was just another ghost in a city full of them. One woman, a Cabo Verdean named Lucia, occasionally smiled at her. Once, she offered Inez half a sandwich during their break. "You look too thin," she said gently. Inez accepted it without protest, too tired to refuse kindness. The nights were the hardest. After work, Inez would return to her room and collapse onto the narrow bed, her body aching, her mind racing. She thought about Tomas constantly. His laugh, his voice, the way he used to pull her close when she was anxious. But she also thought about the house, the jasmine, the life that had been stolen from her. Anger simmered beneath the grief, hot and unrelenting. She replayed Leonor's words over and over, searching for cracks, for anything that might justify what had happened. But there was nothing, only the cold, immovable truth. Inez had trusted the wrong person. She had built her life on someone else's foundation, and when he died, the ground gave way. But grief, for all its weight, is not infinite. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it began to shift. One night, while lying in the dark, Inez remembered something Tomas had said years ago. They had been at a cafe, discussing her frustration with her job at a bookstore. "You're too smart for this," he had told her, his eyes warm and sincere. "You have a mind for numbers, for systems. You could do so much more." At the time, she had laughed it off, too comfortable to imagine change. But now, in the wreckage of her life, those words felt different. They felt like permission to try. Permission to become something more than a woman cleaning other people's messes. Maybe he was right, she thought. And for the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. She felt possibility. The next morning, she stopped at a bookstore on her way home from work and bought a second-hand accounting textbook. It was old, the pages yellowed and dog-eared, but it was a beginning. And beginnings, she was learning, were fragile and precious things. Could you rebuild yourself if everything you knew was taken away? Learning at 32 felt different than learning at 20. There was no safety net, no professor to coddle her, no classmates to compare notes with. There was only Inez, a dim lamp, and the quiet hum of her exhaustion. She studied every night after work, her eyes burning, her fingers tracing equations and balance sheets until they blurred together. The textbook was dense, filled with jargon and concepts that felt impossibly distant from her life. But she pressed on. Slowly, painfully, the numbers began to make sense. She learned about assets and liabilities, about ledgers and reconciliations. She learned that money, like truth, could be tracked, traced, and accounted for. And for the first time in her life, she felt powerful. Her supervisor at the cleaning company, a man named Carlos, noticed the change. He was in his 50s, gruff but fair, the kind of man who respected hard work more than words. One morning, he saw her reading during her break. "What's that?" he asked, nodding toward the book. "Accounting," Inez replied simply. Carlos raised an eyebrow. "You thinking of leaving us?" She smiled faintly. "Not yet, but someday." He nodded, thoughtful. "Good, you're too smart to be cleaning forever." A few weeks later, Carlos approached her again. "I have a friend. Runs a vocational program downtown. They teach accounting, business, that kind of thing. It's free if you qualify. You interested?" Inez stared at him, her heart pounding. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'm interested." The program was rigorous. 3 evenings a week. After her cleaning shifts, Inez took the metro across the city to attend classes. She sat in a room full of people like her, people starting over, people rebuilding. Some were older, some younger, some had lost jobs, others had lost families, but they all shared the same quiet desperation, the same hunger for something better. The instructor, a woman named Sophia, was patient but demanding. She pushed them hard, refused to accept mediocrity, and celebrated every small victory. Inez thrived under her guidance. She absorbed everything: tax codes, financial modeling, auditing principles. She stayed late, asked questions, took notes until her hand cramped. And slowly, the girl who had once been invisible began to emerge. 6 months later, Inez passed her certification exam. It wasn't a degree, but it was legitimate, recognized, valuable. She framed the certificate and hung it on the wall of her tiny room, right next to the wedding photo she had carried from the house. They were strange companions, one representing the past, the other the future. But together, they told the truth of her journey. She had been broken. She had survived. And now, she was becoming something new. Sophia helped her apply for internships, and within weeks, Inez received an offer from a small accounting firm in Benfica. The pay was modest, but it was professional work, real work. She accepted immediately, her hands trembling as she signed the contract. On her last day of cleaning, Lucia hugged her tightly. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." Inez nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I did." But she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The years that followed were quiet but transformative. Inez worked tirelessly, arriving early, staying late, absorbing every lesson her colleagues offered. She learned how to read financial statements with precision, how to spot discrepancies, how to communicate complex ideas with clarity. She was meticulous, disciplined, and unfailingly professional. Her supervisors noticed, her clients noticed, and slowly her reputation grew. She moved from intern to junior accountant, then to senior accountant. Each promotion felt like a small victory, a step further from the woman who had once been evicted in the rain. She moved out of the shared apartment and into a modest studio in Campo de Orique. It was small but hers, truly hers. She painted the walls white, hung curtains in the windows, bought a secondhand desk where she worked late into the night. She planted jasmine on the balcony, a quiet nod to the past she had left behind. The scent filled her evenings, bittersweet and familiar. She thought of Tomas often, but the grief had softened. It no longer consumed her. Instead, it lingered in the background, a quiet ache she had learned to live with. She dated occasionally, but nothing serious. Her focus was elsewhere. She was building something no one could take from her, herself. At 39, Inez was offered a position at Lusitana Real Estate Group, one of Lisbon's most prominent property development companies. They were expanding rapidly, acquiring land across the city, financing new projects, navigating complex financial structures. They needed someone sharp, reliable, someone who could manage their accounts with precision. Inez interviewed twice, presented a financial analysis that impressed the board, and was offered the role of financial director. She accepted without hesitation. The salary was more than she had ever imagined. The responsibility was immense, but she was ready. She had spent 7 years preparing for this moment, and she would not waste it. Her first weeks at Lusitana were intense. She reviewed budgets, audited accounts, met with investors and contractors. The office was sleek and modern, overlooking the Tagus River, the same river she used to cross every morning when she cleaned offices. The irony was not lost on her. She had come full circle, but she was no longer invisible. She was respected, valued, essential. Her colleagues sought her advice. Her decisions shaped the company's future. And every time she signed a contract or approved a loan, she felt a quiet pride. This is mine, she thought. This is what I built. And no one could take it from her. But fate, as it often does, had one more twist in store. If you could rewrite your story, would you erase the hardest chapters or keep them as proof of your strength? If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss the next chapter of life, love, and redemption. It was a Tuesday afternoon, unremarkable in every way, when Inez saw the name. She was reviewing a stack of mortgage applications, routine work she had done 1,000 times before. Her assistant had flagged several files that required her personal approval, mostly high-value properties with complex financing. She scanned the first few quickly, initialing them without much thought. Then she reached the 5th file. The surname stopped her cold. Duarte. Her breath caught. She read it again, slower this time. Leonor Duarte. The address was in Estrella, an upscale neighborhood. The application was for a mortgage on a second property, a renovation project the family was funding through Lusitana. Inez's hands trembled. She set the file down, her heart pounding. For a long moment, she simply stared at the name. Memories flooded back. The house, the rain, Leonore's cold voice. You were a guest in my son's life. The words echoed in her mind, as sharp and cruel as they had been 7 years ago. Inez closed her eyes, steadying her breath. She thought about walking away, passing the file to someone else, avoiding the confrontation entirely. But something stopped her. A voice, quiet but insistent, whispered from deep within, "This is yours to decide." She opened her eyes and picked up the file again. She read every detail carefully: the property value, the loan terms, the family's financial history. Everything was in order. There was no reason to deny the application, but there was also no reason to rush. Inez scheduled the approval meeting herself. The day of the meeting arrived. Inez dressed carefully, choosing a tailored navy suit, her hair pulled back, her posture composed. She arrived at the conference room early, arranging the files neatly on the table. When the door opened, Leonore entered first, followed by her daughter, Marta, and a lawyer. Leonore looked older, her silver hair now streaked with white, her face lined, but still proud. She glanced at Inez without recognition, offering a polite nod. Inez's pulse quickened, but her expression remained neutral. "Good morning," she said smoothly. "I'm Inez Carvalho, financial director. I'll be overseeing your application today." Leonore smiled faintly. "Thank you for meeting with us." The lawyer began presenting the paperwork, explaining the terms, answering procedural questions. Inez listened carefully, asking clarifying questions, taking notes. She was professional, courteous, efficient, but beneath the surface, her mind was racing. Halfway through the meeting, Leonore interrupted. "Forgive me," she said, her brow furrowed. "Your name, Carvalho, it's familiar." Inez met her gaze evenly. "It's a common name in Portugal," she replied. Leonore studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes, of course." But there was hesitation in her eyes, a flicker of something almost like recognition. Inez did not press. She returned to the paperwork, guiding the conversation back to the mortgage. She explained the terms, outlined the repayment schedule, and confirmed the approval. "Everything is in order. The loan will be finalized within the week." Leonore exhaled, visibly relieved. "Thank you. This has been very smooth." Inez smiled politely. "That's our job." As the family stood to leave, Marta shook Inez's hand. "You've been wonderful," she said warmly. "Thank you." Inez nodded. "You're welcome." And then they were gone. Alone in the conference room, Inez sat back in her chair, her hands resting on the table. She felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a strange, quiet peace. She had not sought revenge. She had not humiliated or punished. She had simply done her job, fairly, professionally, without malice. And in that choice, she had reclaimed something more valuable than anger. She had reclaimed her dignity. "I didn't need to destroy her," she thought. "I just needed to rise." And she had. Higher than Leonore could ever imagine. But the story was not over yet. Have you ever held power over someone who once held power over you and chosen mercy instead of revenge? The week passed without incident. Inez approved a loan, the paperwork was finalized, and the Duarte family's new property was secured. She did not think about them much after that. Her days were filled with meetings, audits, strategic planning. Lusitano was thriving, and Inez was integral to its success. But on a quiet Friday afternoon, her assistant knocked on her office door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Eleonora Duarte. She says it's personal." Inez's stomach tightened. "Send her in." Leonore entered slowly, her posture less certain than before. She looked around the office, the large desk, the view of the Tagus. the framed certifications on the wall. Then her eyes landed on Ines, and something shifted. Recognition finally broke through. "It's you," Leonore said softly. Her voice was not cold this time. It was uncertain, almost fragile. Ines gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please, sit." Leonore lowered herself into the chair, her hand folded tightly in her lap. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with 7 years of unspoken history. Finally, Leonore cleared her throat. "I didn't realize it was you. In the meeting, I didn't recognize you." Ines nodded. "People change." Leonore's gaze dropped to her hands. "Yes, they do." She paused, then looked up. "I came to thank you for approving the loan. My lawyer said it could have been complicated, but you made it easy." Ines leaned back in her chair, her expression calm. "It wasn't complicated. Everything was in order. I simply did my job." Leonore nodded, but her eyes glistened. "I know what I did to you," she said quietly, "after Tomas died. I know how it must have felt. I didn't know what else to do. I was grieving too. I was angry, and I took it out on you. That was wrong." Ines studied her for a moment. She saw, perhaps for the first time, not the cold woman who had evicted her, but a mother who had lost her son, a woman who had lashed out in pain, just as Ines had collapsed in grief. "I understand," Ines said finally. "Grief does strange things to people." Leonore's voice cracked. "Can you forgive me?" The question hung in the air. Ines did not answer immediately. She thought about the rain, the suitcase, the jasmine she had left behind. She thought about the nights she had cried herself to sleep, the mornings she had woken up, unsure if she could go on. But she also thought about where she was now, who she had become. "I don't need to forgive you," Ines said gently. "I've already moved on." Leonore's face crumpled. She nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." She stood, smoothing her coat, and turned toward the door. But before she left, she paused. "You would have made Tomas proud," she said softly. "He always believed in you, even when you didn't believe in yourself." And then she was gone. Ines sat alone in her office, the sunlight streaming through the window, the Tagus glittering below. She felt no bitterness, no anger, only a deep, quiet gratitude. She had not destroyed Leonore. She had not sought revenge. She had simply risen. And in rising, she had freed herself, not from Leonore, not from Tomas, but from the belief that her worth was tied to anyone or anything but herself. What would you do if the person who hurt you most asked for your forgiveness? Ines's life continued to flourish. At 42, she was one of the most respected financial directors in Lisbon. Her name appeared in industry publications. Her advice was sought by executives across the city. But success, she learned, was not an endpoint. It was a responsibility. She began to think about the women she had met along the way, the cleaners, the students, the ones still struggling. She thought about Lucia, who had shared her sandwich, about Sophia, who had believed in her, about the countless women who had no one to believe in them at all. And she decided to do something about it. She started small. Once a month, she hosted free financial literacy workshops at a community center in Motoria, the neighborhood where she had once lived. She taught women how to budget, how to save, how to understand contracts and credit. She spoke in simple terms, avoiding jargon, making the lessons accessible. The first workshop had 5 attendees. The second had 12. By the 6th month, the room was full. Women of all ages came, some recently divorced, some widowed, some simply lost. They listened intently, took notes, asked questions, and Ines answered every one. She shared her story too, not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that survival was possible, that rebuilding was real, that they were not alone. One evening, a young woman approached her after a workshop. Her name was Beatrice, and she was 28, newly separated, living in her sister's spare room. "I feel like I'm drowning," she whispered. "I don't know where to start." Ines looked at her, seeing herself in the fear and uncertainty. "You start small," she said gently, "one decision at a time, one day at a time. You don't need to fix everything today. You just need to take the next step." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "What if I fail?" Ines smiled softly. "Then you try again. Failure isn't the end. Giving up is." Over the following months, Ines mentored Beatrice personally, helping her find work, manage her finances, and regain her confidence. Watching Beatrice grow reminded Ines of why she had survived. Not for revenge, not for pride, but for this, for the chance to lift others the way she had once been lifted. Her apartment, once quiet and solitary, became a gathering place. Women came for coffee, for advice, for companionship. They shared their stories, their fears, their small victories. And in those moments, Ines realized something profound. She had become the home she had once lost. Not a building, not a deed, but a place of safety, warmth, and belonging. She had built it from nothing, brick by brick, choice by choice, and it was hers, completely, undeniably hers. On her 43rd birthday, she stood on her balcony watching the sunset over Lisbon. The jasmine bloomed beside her, its scent filling the evening air. She thought about Tomas, about the house, about everything that had been taken and everything she had reclaimed, and she smiled. "I made it," she thought. "I really made it." But the best part, she knew she wasn't done yet. Can you become the person you needed when you were struggling? Years passed. Ines continued to lead at Lusitana, continued to mentor, continued to grow. At 47, she was invited to speak at a national conference on women in finance. She stood on a stage in front of hundreds of people and told her story. Not all of it, but enough. She spoke about loss, about resilience, about the quiet power of choosing to rise. The applause was thunderous. Journalists approached her afterward, asking for interviews. A publishing house reached out, proposing a book. Ines politely declined. She was not interested in fame. She was interested in impact. And that required presence, not headlines. One afternoon, a letter arrived at her office. It was handwritten, postmarked from Coimbra. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was shaky but clear. It was from Leonor. "Dear Ines," it began. "I write this from a hospital bed. The doctors tell me I don't have much time. I wanted to reach out one last time. I have thought about you often over the years, about what I did, about what you became despite it. I want you to know that I have changed the deed to the house, the one you lived in with Tomas. I have transferred it to you. It is yours now, legally and fully. I should have done this years ago. Perhaps it is too late. Perhaps it means nothing. But it is yours. I hope you can use it or sell it or simply know that it was always meant to be yours. I am sorry, truly. Thank you for showing me what grace looks like. Leonore. Inez read the letter 3 times. She set it down slowly, her hands trembling. The house, the Jasmine, the life she had once lost. It was hers, legally, fully. But as she sat there staring out at the Tagus, she realized something unexpected. She didn't want it. The house no longer held power over her. It was a symbol of a past she had long outgrown. She thought about what to do with it. She could sell it, donate the proceeds. She could rent it out, turn it into income. But then another idea emerged, clearer and more purposeful. She would turn it into a sanctuary, a place for women rebuilding their lives, a home for those who had lost theirs. She smiled. Yes, she thought, that's perfect. 6 months later, the house was renovated and transformed. It became a residence for women in transition, a safe, supportive space where they could live while getting back on their feet. Inez hired social workers, partnered with nonprofits, and personally funded the first year of operations. She attended the opening ceremony, standing in the courtyard where the jasmine still grew. Women filled the space, laughing, talking, hopeful. And Inez felt a peace she had never known before. She had taken the place that once represented her deepest loss and turned it into someone else's new beginning. That, she realized, was the truest form of healing. Not forgetting, not even forgiving, but transforming pain into purpose. And in doing so, she had finally, completely set herself free. What would you do if you were given back what was once taken from you?
Years later, Inez received a bank notification. It was the final mortgage payment from the Duarte estate, settled in full. She looked at the transfer details and smiled quietly. She had forgotten about that loan entirely. Leonore's family had honored their commitment, just as Inez had honored hers. She filed the document away and returned to her work. But that evening, standing on her balcony as the sun set over Lisbon, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about the girl who had been evicted in the rain, clutching a wedding photo in a suitcase. She thought about the years of cleaning, studying, rebuilding. She thought about the women she had mentored, the lives she had touched, the sanctuary she had created, and she whispered to herself, maybe it was never about the house. Maybe it was about learning to stand tall without one. The truth is, ownership is a strange thing. We spend so much of our lives trying to possess homes, relationships, identities. But the only thing we ever truly own is how we respond when everything is taken away. Inez had lost her home, her husband, her sense of self. But in the ruins, she had discovered something indestructible, her own strength. And that no deed or document could ever grant or revoke. She was not the woman who had been evicted. She was the woman who had risen. And in rising, she had built something far more permanent than walls. She had built a life that mattered, a legacy that would outlive her, a story that would remind others that even in the darkest moments, we have the power to begin again. The camera fades as Inez opens her window. Lisbon's golden light floods her face. The jasmine blooms beside her. Somewhere in the city, a woman receives a letter inviting her to the sanctuary. Somewhere, another woman signs her first work contract. Somewhere, someone is surviving, and because of Inez, they know it is possible. Because she showed them, not with grand gestures or perfect words, but by living, by refusing to stay down, by choosing every single day to rise. And that, in the end, is the only house that matters, the one you build inside yourself, the one no one can ever take away. If this story touched your heart and you'd like to support this work, consider buying me a coffee on Ko-fi. Every small gesture helps bring more stories like this one to life. Thank you for listening, and remember, your kindness makes stories possible.